Hey, welcome back to our Journey with Jesus Bible study, where we're going through the Bible chronologically in a year using the Tara Lee Cobble Bible Recap Study Plan. Today is day 36, and we're going through Exodus 19 through 21. So in chapter 19, we see the Israelites finally getting to the base of Mount Sinai. And when I say finally, it has only been about 7 weeks since the Passover. And so it's really not that long when we think about how long really that is. I think I've heard it's 50 days, 40 days, 50 days. I can't remember. I mean, I know 7 weeks, 7 days, but I'm just saying. So it's about 50 days. Okay. So how this is starting to, God delivered them from Egypt, right? Like he delivered them from slavery and has brought them through all these different things. And now they're at the base of Mount Sinai. And so this is where God is going to show them. He brought them out of Egypt, but now he's got to get Egypt out of them. They've been there for 400 years, and everything that they had been taught was regarding like Egyptians, right? I'm sure that there were select ones that passed down everything that from Jacob and Abraham and Isaac. However, we know that if you're in a culture, things from their culture permeate into ours. And so the plagues that he put on their little g gods in Egypt weren't just for the Egyptians, they were for the Israelites too. But here in chapter 18, we see where God was establishing judges, like a judicial type system, but now he's establishing the laws that the judges will uphold. And in verse 4 of 19, he says, "You yourselves have seen what I did to the Egyptians and how I bore you on eagle's wings and brought you to myself." God didn't just bring them out of Egypt to a specific location or even just to deliver them into the promised land. He wanted to bring them to himself. And I said this before in yesterday's video, but he kept telling Egypt, then they will know that I am Yahweh, that I am the Lord. Now he is showing the Israelites that he is Yahweh. He is their God. And this is how you will interact with me. This is how you will obey me. So they'll spend about 10 months here at the base of Mount Sinai. And considering the amount of time that it took God to get them out of slavery, and then what did I say? It was about 40 days, 7 weeks. Okay. It's going to take 10 months for him to deliver the law and give them instructions on building where he's going to dwell with them. And so, this is so significant. I'm going to do a completely different video about how really the Israelite story is a story of us. And so it's not, the quick part is the salvation, the justification. It's the law, it's the obedience, it's the getting Egypt out of them that takes the longest and is the hardest. Another thing to note is this is the first congregational gathering of God's people. He is going to be up on the mountain, and there's rules about how they can't get to certain ones. There's only certain ones that can go certain heights to him, and we'll see that mimicked in the tabernacle. Around the base of the mountain are the main Israelites, and certain ones could go halfway, and then Moses was the only one that could go up and speak with God, and we will see that mimicked again in the tabernacle. Only Aaron, the high priest, will be able to go into the Holy of Holies once a year. And so I just thought that was a really interesting little thing there. And another thing that made me, it was one of the commentaries that I watched was Moses is here. This is not the first time he's been to Sinai. This is the first time was it probably, I don't know how long, I can't remember off the top of my head how long the plague started. But anyway, the last time that he was here was the burning bush. And so I can imagine his excitement for them to experience God in the same way that he did when God revealed himself to him in the burning bush. And now the Lord is going to reveal himself to the Israelites out of fire and thunder and smoke at the beginning, at the top of a mountain. And I can just imagine his excitement. So in these next few chapters, we see a whole lot of Moses going up to the mountain and coming down and going up and coming down. And I mean, I think we really kind of take that at, face value and just kind of for granted, but that's a lot of work, going up and then coming down and then going up and then coming down. And then he's carrying these huge stones that probably weigh tons. I mean, obviously it would be tons, but so much, and him having to go up and down. And anyway, but I think it's about 10 times that Moses goes up. 10 is a significant number. I think it's a number of completion as well. We see a lot of like numbers times 10, and it's like utter completion. So anyway, I just thought that was something interesting. And then it's, God or Moses being the mediator for them. That's very significant in the fact that he's going up to them and coming down and going back up and telling all these things to them, right? Preparing them for his presence. And then we get to chapter 20 where God is giving Moses the 10 Commandments. We're getting all of this, but this is not the Israelites getting this information. This is the Lord telling Moses. And so this is Moses recording that once. And something that was said was that the great commandment that Jesus gives us is it's stated as what to do, not what not to do. Now, granted, these 10 commandments are like, thou shalt not, in that way. But then when Jesus comes, he's kind of like, love God, love your neighbor. That's the great commandment. And so it sums them all up into what you should do rather than what you don't need to do. Another thing that I thought was so beautiful and just so compassionate is that the Lord did not give the 10 commandments or the law while the Egyptians were still enslaved and still in bondage. He waited until they could rightly do the things that he was asking them to do. They could not have obeyed while they were still in bondage. And how similar is that in our own life? That God is not calling us to do the things to earn our salvation. There's no way we can. He saves us, and then he shows us how to live for him. He doesn't give us the law before we are saved because we can't do it. We would not do it correctly. We would do it out of obligation or out of different reasons and not out of gratitude and love for God. And so there's no way we could have kept the law with the right heart. Okay, and so as the Lord kind of shows himself to them now, when in verse 18, now when all the people saw the thunder and the flashes of lightning and the sound of the trumpet and the mountain smoking, the people were afraid and trembled. And they are they're recognizing their need for a mediator because they were scared to interact with God, to see him in that way. And now in his graciousness, he's like, don't be scared of him in that way. As Christians, we should fear him in reverence, as a reverent fear, and awe of who he is, but not out of fear of judgment. We should have a joyful obedience of gratitude because of our salvation. And that's kind of the crux and the thought of obedience is we don't do it out of a slave mentality. We do it because of what he did for us, and we love him and we don't want to grieve him. Okay, so the end of 20, we begin to get extended expressions of the 10 Commandments, also known as the Book of the Covenant. And so as we go through here, all of these things are more detailed ways to keep the 10 Commandments. One thing to note is that these were worded in the way specifically for that group of people. They were unique to that time. And so in the beginning of chapter 1, it talks about law of slaves. Well, slaves were a part of that time, but it's not forced servitude in the slave that I think it's called the transatlantic slave trade, in the way of the selling of humans in that way. These were more servants, and we'll see more in as we go on that these people, it's really a way for them, like if they fell on hard times, for these people to be able to provide for them. And we see that in here, that it's a compassionate thing more so than a forced labor thing. And then it's even more reinforced in 21 verse 16, where that whoever steals a man and sells him, and anyone found in possession of him shall be put to death. I mean, slavery is not okay. And we see that echoed here. These laws, the book of the covenant is the way God was separating out his people to look different from the surrounding regions. We already know what the Egyptians were like, but the Canaanites were very similar. And so this is going to be a way for the Lord to separate and set apart his people. One thing that I thought was very interesting at the end of chapter 20, in verses 25 through 26, it says, if you make me an altar of stone, you shall not build it of hewn stones, which means they were carved up. For if you wield your tool on it, you profane it, and you shall not go up to the steps to my altar and make your nakedness to be exposed on it. The altar needed to be made of stones that he created. Nothing that man tried to alter and make it look a certain way and make it look beautiful. What God had already created was perfect. And so God said, I want the altar to be of what I created, what my hands created, not what you created. And the second verse in 26, where it talks about like nothing on the steps of the altar, no nakedness exposed. Well, it was pagan culture for sexual acts to be done on those altars. And he's like, no, we're not doing any of that. We are different than everybody else. And lastly, so the book of the covenant, we're seeing the beginning of it right here, right? Well, it starts with addressing what they were just delivered out of, slavery and bondage and servitude. And so God was kind of like, I know you were treated this way, but that was not okay. And we're not going to bring that into where I'm calling you to now. We are going to change. We are not going to do the same things. And so I think it's kind of beautiful that the Lord he already knows. He already knows, like, this is what you're used to, but I'm calling you to more. I'm calling you to better. We see a lot of laws in here that protect women. I know a lot of the things that we could look at and say that are against women, but like we see in I think it's 7 through 11 of 21 laws that kind of protect the women. So they have full rights of a wife, right? Like these are not, if the daughters are as a slave, but if she is made a wife, she gets full rights. You don't get to make her a wife and just use her. She gets the full rights of a wife. And if the husband couldn't afford the full bride price, that was addressed. And it's really, if you really pay attention, the Lord really does provide and protect females. The very mention of women at all, because that was so against the culture back then. And so a lot of people kind of talk about how the Lord is kind of hard on women and doesn't provide for women, but when you really look at it, he does, because we, in this time, were thought of as the least, the lost, and the left out, right? And so, but even in the building of the tabernacle, women are vital to it, and you'll see where I'm coming from with that. So anyway, that is the end of our lesson today. If you want, leave a comment on something that really stood out to you, and I'll see you tomorrow.